Hey, Coach, so excited you found us on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe and like. Second thing is make sure you go over and check out teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better. We have one-on-one calls, community, it's resources, it's everything that will take to become a better basketball coach. Less time, win more games. Let me help you do that from someone that's been a nationally ranked coach and done it for 30 plus years. Go over and check it out, teachhoops.com. Let's head off to the video.
All right, welcome to Coaching Youth Hoops, episode 23.
23.
Right?
23.
23. Good number.
It's a great number. I mean, just
MJ.
think about that, right? We've come, it's 23 episodes. Started, a few months ago. A lot has happened since.
That's a retired jersey in my program.
Oh, yeah? Who?
Yeah. So Wesley Matthews. Anybody that wins, so I've had 4 Mr. Basketballs. If you're Mr. Basketball, I retire your jersey. Now, is it officially retired? No, because we don't do that, but I just don't buy the jersey.
Right.
So no
one's
one's
get hung in the rafters.
It doesn't get hung in the rafters or anything, but no one's worn those jersey numbers since they became Mr. Basketball.
And you've had 4 over the years.
At 4.
That's incredible.
It is.
Yeah.
It's good players. All right. So what's this week's topic?
We're talking about, so now that evaluations for a lot of coaches are coming up, picking their teams for the fall, youth teams, etc. We're talking about how to help parents be positive role models for your youth teams, because as any coach knows, who's been coaching a little bit, parents play a big role in the success of your program. And the joke is always, you don't pick the players, you pick the parents of those players to be on your team, right? The ones that are going to be helpful, the ones that are going to be supportive, right? So we're going to talk about how do we help, as a coach, help parents be positive role models.
And from last week's episode, when we talked about evaluations, I think it's really hard to separate the two entities, to separate the parent from the child. And it's hard. You got to be conscious of that separation. That last week was talking about evaluation and tryouts and picking the right team and picking the players. And we're human, so I think that parent thing sneaks in sometimes, and you're really picking the player, and then you have to learn to hopefully deal with it. But there's some cross there. I think that we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it a little bit.
And some of the things that I've done what I don't want it to do as a coach, and even approaching this podcast, is you could get really negative on this subject and say parents are a pain and they ruin the blah, blah, blah. We've all heard this, and we probably all have experienced this, but let's flip it. Like, how do we deal with, should we call them aggressive parents? You have to think about this, and think about it. If you have your own children, they're the most precious thing in your world, and you always want the best for them. And you sitting in the stands, what you think is best for them is more playing time, more court time, and etc. Right? From a coach's perspective, and you are in the inside of your day-to-day practices, you know how that child performs, how they perform a particular task. Did they show up for practice or not, right? Do they know the plays that you've worked on? Do they just come on game days, right? And then, you have to adjust your schedule. Well, parents just say, well, I'm here, I signed up, my child should be playing. And when they approach you, how do you deal with that? So what I always did, and even at the youth level, 3rd through 8th grade, is I had a parent meeting and I said, here are my rules, right? And we went through the rules of the team, not just for them, but overall, what my expectations were. And some people, I didn't care, thought it was overkill, but on the same side, it's like I got that structure up front, right? And then anytime anyone complained, I always turned that into a positive and said, oh my gosh, you sound so passionate about that subject. Why don't you come to practice and and work with us on that, teach that. We practice, hour and a half, hour, whatever, 2 to 3 days a week. And then you can sit on the sidelines with us as well and maybe take stats on that particular thing. Haven't yet have a parent take me up on that.
The high school level, I bet you would. That's the problem.
Well,
I think you wouldn't.
yeah,
No, I think there's two things. I think first of all, everyone should have a parent meeting. You should
yeah,
also, just like the players, we want to teach them how to do things. I think
yeah,
you're not that you're going to teach a 45-year-old how to do things, but I think you have to spell out that your biggest job is to be your kid's biggest cheerleader and fan. Don't
mhm,
worry about the X's and O's. Don't worry about how many baskets. You are the first thing out of your mouth when they walk over should be, "Oh, it was so much fun watching you play today.
right,
Gosh, that was great. Oh, I bet you had a lot of fun." It should not be, "Wow, you weren't using your left hand enough or you weren't attacking." No, you should be. So I think as parents, as the coach, we have to coach the parents
that's right.
about what they should be. I mean, they're and I'm going to do this with my high school team this year. It's like, because I have a couple parents that I want them to be fans. I don't want them to be coaches. I want them to be
That's right.
fans. Enjoy watching I mean, I wish I could go back and watch my kid again. Go back and watch them. Be their biggest fan. Be their biggest supporter. Don't be their coach. They already have a coach. And
Yeah,
and again, the example I gave is, I mean, you could, if you really want to go, you could pull a parent up and say, "Here's the way you should interact." Like, I mean, that the psychology and the science behind it does that. Do not make it a negative. You didn't do this when they come over. It should be, I love watching you play. I love watching you give it all in your team and blah, blah, blah. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think you have to over communicate to parents, from someone that's coached for 35 years.
what does that mean?
Over communicate. So let them know everything that's going on, when practices are, how practices are going to work, when we're going to be done, what's expected of the parents, what's expected of the players. I mean, you probably can't send too many emails,
Mhm.
uh, because most problems occur because they didn't know practice was changing. They didn't know that they were expected to be at the tournament. And again, some of that might cause some conflict
Yeah.
initially, but it's going to be less, it's going to be if there is such a thing, a better conflict than a worse conflict when they didn't know that the tournament got changed the next weekend.
Do
And
you use any of the software out there like Team Snap to manage even your high school team?
I don't. And
Okay.
I'm looking for a good one. I know there's a bunch out there.
Yeah.
With our players, my assistant coach does a lot of the Snapchatting because I'm old. Because they don't really do emails and stuff. But again, with parents, and going back to the parent part, emailing, you should probably do it more than once too. If your inbox looks like
Yeah.
my inbox,
Yeah. Right.
like, "Hey, next week's tournament is changing from the morning to the afternoon." I'll send it on Monday, I'll send it on Wednesday, I'll send it on Friday.
Mhm.
Hopefully one of those three gets through and
Yeah.
opened. And if they've already read it, they're just going to trash it anyway. It doesn't matter. And I've no one's ever complained about over emailing or over communicating. I don't know. I just think that's a big thing.
Oh, I think you're right on with that. You can't say enough. And we use one of those tools. We use Team Snap to manage our K through 12 teams, and anytime the schedule right gets updated, it's integrated within their calendar. So that's one point of communication. But I think the other, or in addition to that, is sharing with them, and we're going to dive into some of this next week too, is who are you as a coach? What's your philosophy, right? So there's 101 ways. We always say there's 101 ways to coach this game. Parent in the stand knows their influence in the way that they maybe have experienced the game, and you come from a different interpretation, have a different philosophy. Doesn't mean you're right, doesn't mean they're right. It's just a different way of approaching the game and teaching the game. So when they're a lot of times that comes from the parent is looking at the game saying, well, why don't you do this, why don't you do that? And I think the other thing is just that is part of your communication, is who you are as a coach and what you believe in and what your philosophy is. You don't have to go deep into it, but just give an overview. That will save a lot of discussion.
Yeah, like who are you as a coach
Yeah.
I think that's an important thing. I just think it is. It's like, and especially at the youth level, it's all about, and we'll say this a billion times. As a youth coach, you should never be the kid's last coach.
Yeah.
So it's about that relationship. And the relationship isn't only about the kids, especially when they're 10, it's about the parent
the parents,
relationship
yeah.
too. And if the parents are, the kid might give it up and not want to because the parent's not having a great experience about it either. So, yeah, it's just, I think there's a window there with that, I think.
Well, let's talk about playing time too. That's obviously the biggest one, right? Make sure you detail out if your league, some leagues, like I know ours always had playing time rules. Make sure the parents understand what that means, and how you will do rotations. Now, from a coach's perspective, you're teaching a youth, every kid should play, as much as possible, much that makes sense. The issue that we always ran into is players didn't come to practice and they showed up for the game, but and then you still had that playtime rule, right? Where you had to play them if they were there, but they didn't come to any of the practices. And that's a tough thing. And you just follow the rule in that particular case, play them if they're not showing up for practice, play them the minimum you have to, so you're rewarding the players that have been showing up for practice. But again, communicate playing time, how you're going to do it. If you don't have any, rules in place for the league, with the league that you're in. Huge thing.
It's a huge thing. All right. Anything else, Coach?
Again, let's recap. So explain everything, over communicate, explain your playing time, talk about your philosophy with your parents. And this all just goes back to the communication piece. Really, it's just tell them your philosophies, your thinking, your playing time rules, etc. And you'll solve a lot of those. Have a 24-hour rule. Don't talk to me after, wait 24 hours if you're upset. Maybe even I know you do that at the high school, I do as well, and I always did at the grade school level, is both child and parent are present in those discussions, because Johnny and Sally know what's going on in practice and the parents don't.
Right.
So
I agree. How long have you been married, Coach?
It'll be actually next week, Sunday, 23 years.
23, and I've been 24. And Coach and I can tell you, communication, if you don't communicate, yeah. So that's a life lesson. We're giving all the youth coaches life lessons, because there might be some youngsters out there. You better talk to your spouse.
That's right.
All right. Till next week, Coach.
Till next.
Hey, Coach, so happy you enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe and like. Go over and check out teachhoops.com for coaches who want to get better.